The train shrieked once more before its steel wheels groaned away into the white hush of Montana's winter. Evelyn Carrington stood very still on the wooden platform, her gloved hand gripping the strap of her satchel until her knuckles ached. The steam hung in the air for a moment, then drifted and vanished, leaving her with nothing but the sound of boots scuffing and families calling to one another. Men lifted wives down from the cars, children ran laughing to uncles and grandfathers, and merchants hurried travelers toward warm inns. Evelyn had no one. She stood apart, the hem of her dress stiff with frost, her breath showing in small clouds that faded as quickly as they came. She had traveled 2 weeks by rail, each night telling herself that at the end of the line, someone would be waiting with a smile, a wagon, and a place where she might finally belong. But as the last trunk was claimed, and the last pair of arms wrapped tight around a loved one, Evelyn knew she was alone again. She sank slowly onto the bench outside the station, its planks rough beneath her, its cold pressing through the fabric of her dress. Whispers floated from a knot of women standing near the freight office. They glanced her way with quick eyes, then leaned closer to one another. Evelyn did not need to hear every word. She had learned the tone by now, that rustle of judgment dressed as pity. Somewhere, the phrase, mail order bride, slipped into the air like smoke, and then another word, half-blood. Her cheeks burned, despite the cold. She looked down at her gloves and tried to smooth the worn leather as if she could press away the ache in her chest. A pair of boys sauntered past, no more than 16, their laughter sharp against the winter silence. One nudged the other and said louder than he needed to, she thought she could buy herself a husband. They both laughed as they went on. Evelyn's lips trembled, but she pressed them closed. She would not give them the satisfaction of tears in the open street. The sky above was the flat gray of ash, the kind that promised snow before nightfall. A wind rolled down from the mountains, tugging loose strands of her dark hair from beneath her bonnet. She pulled her shawl tighter, though it did little against the bite in the air. Around her, the platform emptied. Soon the station master alone remained, fussing with a lantern near the door. Evelyn thought of asking him for directions to a boarding house, but her voice caught in her throat. What coin she had left was thin, barely enough for a week. She drew from her satchel the letter she had read 100 times. The edges were frayed, the ink smudged where her fingers had lingered. Promises had been written there, of hearth and home, of welcome and safety. She traced the words again, even though now they felt like lies carved into paper. The cold deepened, but it was nothing compared to the emptiness rising inside her. She closed her eyes, wishing for the warmth of a hand reaching toward her, and found only the wind. Evelyn sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the ground as the cold bit deeper into her toes. She had lost track of time on that bench, caught between shame and fear, when a small voice startled her. She looked up and saw a little girl no more than 5, standing a few feet away. The child's cheeks were pink from the cold, her wool coat a size too large, and her mittens tied together with a string across her shoulders. She held out a crust of bread, half-eaten, as if it were a treasure worth sharing. Evelyn blinked, too surprised to answer at first. The girl's blue eyes were wide and serious. "You look hungry," she said softly. The kindness pierced Evelyn's chest like sunlight through clouds. She hesitated, then took the bread with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she whispered, her throat tight. The girl smiled, quick and bright, then glanced over her shoulder. A man stood a few paces behind, broad-shouldered and tall, his coat patched at the elbows, his hat shadowing his face. He watched in silence, arms folded, as though deciding whether Evelyn was danger or nothing at all. Evelyn rose slowly, bread still in her hand, uncertain whether to speak. The man's gaze was steady, not cruel, but not kind either. He looked like a man used to carrying burdens without complaint. His jaw was square, his hair dark, and his eyes the color of river stone. He stepped closer and placed a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Lily," he said in a low voice. The child tilted her head back to him. "She was sad, Papa." The man's eyes flicked back to Evelyn. "You? Waiting for someone?" Evelyn swallowed and tried to stand straight. "I was," she said, "but it seems I was mistaken." He studied her a long moment, then shifted the sack in his other hand. The air between them filled with the sound of the wind, rattling the station sign. At last he spoke again. "You have no place to stay." Evelyn shook her head, ashamed of the truth. "I will manage." He glanced at Lily, whose small fingers still brushed against Evelyn's coat, as if unwilling to let go. The man's voice softened a fraction. "It's a long walk into town. There's a roof and warm broth at my place, just for the night." Evelyn's heart stumbled at the offer. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then whispered, "I don't even know your name." "Daniel Mercer," he said simply. His voice carried no invitation, only fact. He looked down at Lily, then back at Evelyn. "She can't abide seeing folks left out in the cold. That's all this island." Evelyn nodded, her cheeks burning. "Thank you," she murmured. Lily slipped her small hand into hers as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Evelyn clutched it gently, and together they followed Daniel off the platform, leaving the empty station behind, the snow falling harder as dusk closed in around them. The cabin sat in a hollow, where the wind pressed less cruelly, though snow still gathered at the door and seeped in through the cracks between the logs. Evelyn woke early her first morning, uncertain if she should still be there, but Lily tugged at her hand and asked if she would make breakfast. The girl's trust was so simple, so bright, that Evelyn found herself moving to the hearth before she had truly decided. She stirred the pot with careful hands, adding what little she could find, and the smell of warm porridge soon filled the air. Daniel came in from the barn with snow dusting his shoulders. He paused at the door, eyes settling on the sight of Evelyn at the stove. He said nothing, only nodded once, then set his gloves on the table. His silence was thick, but she could not read whether it meant displeasure or weary acceptance. As the days passed, Evelyn began to take small tasks upon herself. She mended Lily's dress with neat stitches, humming softly while the child sat at her feet drawing shapes in the dirt with a stick. She swept the floor, patched the curtain, and even found herself laughing once when Lily tried to balance a basket on her head like a crown. Each time Daniel entered, he seemed to watch without watching, his eyes flicking toward them then away again. He rarely spoke more than a few words, yet his presence filled the room like the scent of pine smoke. In the evenings, when the snow piled high against the walls, and the world outside was hushed, Evelyn sat by the fire, with Lily curled beside her. She opened a worn book she had carried in her satchel, its pages frayed, its cover softened by years of handling. She read aloud, her voice steady, though quiet, and Lily's eyes grew wide with wonder. The stories lifted the small cabin into another world, a place where knights and maidens and hidden treasures replaced the endless cold. Daniel would sit nearby, carving wood or mending tack, his hands busy, his face unreadable. Yet more than once Evelyn caught him pausing, his head tilted just slightly, as if the sound of her voice had reached him in some deep place he kept guarded. The days found a rhythm Evelyn had not known she could long for. She rose before dawn, fetched water from the well, cooked, cleaned, and kept Lily close by her side. Sometimes she caught herself smiling without meaning to, the corners of her mouth turning up when Lily's laughter filled the air. But each time her heart lifted, it quickly sank again. She reminded herself that this was not her home. She was a guest, a stray taken in out of pity or necessity. Daniel's distance was a constant reminder. He never raised his voice, never treated her unkindly, but the wall between them was solid, built from grief and years of silence. Still, something delicate began to take root in that small cabin. Evelyn did not dare name it, but she felt it in the warmth of Lily's hand in hers, in the sound of Daniel's boots returning each evening, in the quiet meals shared by firelight. It was not belonging, not yet, but it was closer than she had ever known. The fire burned low, its glow softening the rough walls of the cabin. Outside, the wind pressed against the shutters, carrying the faint howl of coyotes across the frozen land. Inside, silence stretched between Evelyn and Daniel, broken only by Lily's even breathing as she slept curled under a quilt by the hearth. Evelyn sat with her hands folded tight in her lap, staring at the flames as if they might swallow the weight of all the years behind her. She had not meant to speak, But the warmth of the room and the steady presence of Daniel across from her loosened something she had kept hidden. "I was supposed to be married once," she said quietly, her voice almost lost to the crackle of the wood. Daniel lifted his eyes from the piece of leather he had been mending. Her words seemed to hang in the space between them, fragile yet unshakable. She kept her gaze on the fire. Twice, in fact, both men sent letters. Both promised homes, and both vanished when I arrived. One never opened the door at all. The other let his mother tell me I was not welcome. Her throat tightened as she remembered the long walks away from those houses, her heart dragging behind her like a wounded limb. Daniel said nothing, but his hands stilled. Evelyn drew a breath and pressed on. "Folks like to whisper," she murmured, a bitter smile tugging at her lips. "They say my blood is mixed, that my mother was taken by Indians." She lowered her eyes to her gloves. "Some think it makes me less, some think it makes me dangerous." She gave a small, shaky laugh. "I never seemed to be enough of one thing or the other. Always something to be turned away." The silence after her words felt endless. She feared she had said too much, opened herself in a place where the cold would creep in and make her regret it. Then Daniel shifted in his chair. His face was unreadable, carved with lines that spoke of long days and harder nights. His gray eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. "I know what it is to be whispered about," he said finally, his voice low, as though the memory itself was heavy to carry. Evelyn looked at him, surprised by the hint of confession. He did not say more, only returned to his work. But his hands moved slower now, his eyes softer. She wanted to ask, but something told her not to push. She had revealed her scars, and though his remained hidden, she sensed they were there, deep and old. The fire cracked and settled. Evelyn pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders, the ache of memory easing just a little beneath the quiet acceptance she found in Daniel's gaze. He had not judged, had not turned away, and that small mercy was more than she had dared to hope for. She leaned back against the chair, her eyelids heavy, and let the warmth carry her into sleep, while Daniel kept his silent watch beside the fire. The days stretched into weeks, each one marked by the simple rhythm of chores and the quiet company of three souls learning how to share the same space. Evelyn found herself rising with the dawn, not because anyone asked her to, but because Lily's small voice would call for her, eager for another lesson at the table. Evelyn would take a scrap of paper, smooth it out, and guide Lily's hand as she drew crooked letters with a piece of charcoal. The girl's tongue poked from the corner of her mouth as she worked, her laughter spilling out when she made a mistake, and Evelyn gently corrected her. Sometimes Daniel would pause in the doorway, snow still clinging to his boots, and watch without a word. His face gave little away, yet his eyes lingered a heartbeat longer than they once had. When the snow eased, and the meadow beyond the cabin showed patches of brown grass, Evelyn and Lily gathered the first wildflowers that dared to push through the frost. Lily tucked them into her braids, and Evelyn showed her how to weave a crown with nimble fingers. The girl wore it proudly, running circles around the cabin with her giggles ringing clear. Evelyn laughed with her, the sound spilling into the air like a melody she had forgotten she could sing. From the porch, Daniel leaned on the rail, tools in hand, and for once his mouth curved just slightly. Not a full smile, but something near enough to soften the hard lines of his face. Evenings became the time Evelyn cherished most. The fire would be lit, Lily would curl close with her head resting on Evelyn's lap, and stories would rise from the worn book in her satchel. Sometimes she read tales of faraway kings. Sometimes she told old stories she remembered from her mother's lips. The child's eyes shone in the firelight, and more than once, Evelyn felt Daniel's gaze on her as she spoke, steady and thoughtful. She never looked directly at him, but she felt the weight of his listening, and it warmed her in a way she tried not to name. There were moments when their hands brushed, passing a bowl or a folded cloth, and each time Evelyn felt a current pass through her, small but undeniable. Daniel never remarked on it, but neither did he draw away as quickly as he once had. His silence was changing, no longer a wall, but something softer, as though words might come if given time. Evelyn dared not hope too much. Yet in the hush of those evenings, she let herself dream for just a breath, longer than before. The cabin, once a place of quiet morning, slowly filled with a different kind of sound. Lily's laughter, Evelyn's gentle voice, the soft scrape of Daniel's chair as he lingered by the fire. It was not love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something tender, fragile as the flowers Lily wove into her hair, and Evelyn held it close like a secret she prayed would last. The thaw came slow, loosening the grip of winter one stubborn day at a time. With spring came trips into town for flour, seed, and nails, and with those trips came the stares. At first Evelyn kept her head down, carrying Lily's small hand in hers as they walked the rutted street, but the whispers soon grew too loud to ignore. Two women stepped aside on the boardwalk, their voices low yet sharp enough to cut. That's her, the one Daniel Mercer keeps. Not his wife, not even fit to be. The other gave a huff. Half-blood trash. Nothing good ever comes of that. Evelyn felt her face burn, but she gripped Lily's hand tighter and moved on, her heart heavy as stone. In the mercantile, she caught the shopkeeper's quick glance toward her, the hesitation before he weighed her sugar and set it on the counter. He had once been friendly, eager to help, but now his tone was clipped, his smile forced. Daniel came in behind her, and the change was swift. The man spoke louder, tried to sound at ease, but the tension was plain. Daniel's jaw set hard as he paid and lifted the sack to his shoulder. He said little, only touched Evelyn's arm lightly to guide her outside. The air was thick with judgment. Neighbors pretending not to stare. Men pausing in their talk to mutter as they watched Evelyn and Daniel pass. By the time they reached the wagon, Daniel's silence had sharpened into something dangerous. He tossed the sack into the bed and tied it down with more force than needed. Evelyn climbed up beside Lily, her eyes downcast, wishing she could shrink until no one saw her at all. On the ride home, the wind carried dust and the steady creak of the wagon wheels. Daniel's hands gripped the reins so tight his knuckles were white. Finally he spoke, his voice rough. "You don't owe me anything." Evelyn looked at him, startled. His eyes stayed on the road. "Don't let their talk make you think you do. I brought you under my roof for her sake, not because I expected anything from you." Evelyn's throat tightened. She wanted to thank him, wanted to tell him she never thought otherwise. Yet something in his voice betrayed more than his words. That night the silence at supper was different, strained, brittle. Lily chattered as she always did, telling stories about a rabbit she had seen near the barn. But Daniel's answers were short, his gaze distant. Evelyn tried to focus on the child's bright face, yet her heart twisted with guilt. She was the cause of this, she thought. The reason neighbors turned cold, the reason Daniel bore the weight of their scorn. But beneath her guilt lay something else, a quiet wonder at the anger in his eyes when others spoke ill of her. For all his walls and silences, for all his insistence that she owed him nothing, his fury revealed a truth he could not yet admit. He cared, and that knowledge both steadied and frightened her as the fire burned low. The night had settled quiet. The fire burned low, and the cabin seemed wrapped in peace when Evelyn first stirred from sleep. A sound reached her through the stillness, soft but wrong. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders, and saw Lily restless on her small cot, her face flushed, her breath quick and shallow. Evelyn crossed the room at once, her hand brushing the girl's cheek. Heat pulsed against her palm, fierce and frightening. She shook Daniel awake where he slept, slumped in his chair. His eyes opened, unfocused at first, then wide with alarm when he saw his daughter. "She is burning," Evelyn said, trying to keep her voice steady. Daniel was at the cot in a heartbeat, his large hands fumbling as he touched the child's damp hair. "She was fine yesterday," he muttered, panic thick in his voice. "Just a cough." Evelyn forced calm into her words. "It is more than that now. She needs tending, or she will not last till morning." Daniel's jaw tightened, his chest rising and falling fast. "I should take her to town," he said, already reaching for his coat. Evelyn caught his arm. "The roads are mud and ice. She will not survive the trip. Let me help her." For a moment his eyes searched hers, wild with fear, as though weighing whether he could trust her with the most precious piece of his life. Evelyn did not flinch, did not look away. "My mother taught me," she whispered. "Herbs, teas, ways to break a fever." Daniel swallowed hard, then gave a single sharp nod. "Tell me what to do." Evelyn moved quickly, her satchel open on the table, hands pulling out dried roots and wrapped bundles she had carried from place to place. She set water to boil over the fire, the heat rising as she crushed leaves into a paste and mixed others into a strong, bitter tea. Daniel hovered close, his strength useless now, his hands trembling as he wet cloths and held them ready. Evelyn laid one across Lily's chest, murmuring low words meant to soothe, then lifted the girl's head to drip the tea slowly past her lips. Lily whimpered, tried to turn away, but Evelyn coaxed gently until she swallowed. Hour by hour they fought. Evelyn changed the cloths, fed sips of tea, wiped sweat from the child's brow. Daniel never left her side, his eyes fixed on Lily, as though willing her to live. Once his hand brushed Evelyn's as they worked together, and he whispered hoarsely, "She is all I have." Evelyn did not answer, only pressed her hand over his for the briefest moment before turning back to the child. The night dragged on, the fire snapping low, the air heavy with fear. Then, just as dawn's first gray light slipped through the cracks, Lily stirred. Her breathing eased, her cheeks damp but cooler. Her lips parted in a soft sigh. Evelyn sagged with relief, tears stinging her eyes. Daniel pressed both hands to his face, his shoulders shaking once before he looked at Evelyn, his gaze raw and unguarded. "You saved her," he said, voice breaking. She shook her head, still holding the girl's small hand. "No, she saved herself. I only kept watch." Yet the look in his eyes told her he would never forget who had stood between life and death with him that night. The fever broke with the dawn, leaving Lily weak but breathing steady, her small body damp with sweat, yet no longer burning. Evelyn sat beside her through the day, spooning broth to her lips and wiping her forehead, humming low songs that came from half-remembered lullabies of her childhood. Lily clung to her hand as though it were the only anchor she trusted, her eyes heavy, but always finding Evelyn before sleep, pulled her under again. Each time she whispered "Mama" in her half-dreaming voice. Evelyn's heart swelled and ached all at once. She had not thought herself capable of such love, yet it flowed out of her without asking. Daniel moved through the cabin like a restless shadow. He fetched water, chopped wood, mended a broken strap, anything to keep his hands busy while his eyes strayed again and again to where Evelyn sat with his daughter. Gratitude pressed heavy in his chest, but the words refused to form. He had never been good at speaking what mattered, and now, when he wanted most to thank her, to tell her she had given him back his whole world, silence bound him tighter than rope. He watched instead, his jaw clenched, his heart raw with feelings he did not know how to carry. When Lily was strong enough to leave her bed, she refused to let Evelyn drift far. She followed her about the cabin, tugging at her skirts, asking for more stories, insisting Evelyn sit beside her at meals. Evelyn gave in gladly, brushing the child's hair, tying ribbons at the ends, mending her doll with neat stitches. She moved through their days as though she had always belonged, yet inside she reminded herself again and again that this was not her home. She feared Daniel's silence meant he tolerated her only for Lily's sake, and one word from him could send her away. That fear deepened when they returned to town for supplies. Whispers no longer stayed hidden. Men at the smithy stopped talking when she passed. Women turned their shoulders, and more than one merchant pretended not to see her waiting at the counter. Daniel's presence kept their words quiet, but Evelyn saw the looks, the curling lips, the tilt of heads. One evening, as he loaded seed onto the wagon, a rancher spoke plain. "You ought to send her off, Mercer, before folks think you lost your sense. She's nothing but trouble." Daniel's hands stilled on the rope. His eyes were hard when he turned. "She has done nothing but keep my girl alive," he said, his voice low and edged like a blade. The rancher muttered but stepped back. Evelyn heard, though she pretended she had not. On the ride home she kept her gaze on the hills, afraid of what the anger in his voice meant. Was it only defense? Or something more? That night, As Lily fell asleep with her arms wrapped around Evelyn's neck, Daniel stood at the fire, his back to them. His shoulders were rigid, his head bowed. He said nothing, but in the silence, his struggle was clear. Gratitude, longing, fear, and pride all tangled inside him. And Evelyn, rocking Lily gently, wondered how long the weight of town voices would press before it broke them apart. The morning came with pale light spilling over the ridge, the kind that carried no warmth. Evelyn sat on the edge of the cot with her carpetbag open beside her. She folded her few dresses with careful hands, smoothing the worn fabric as though each crease might delay the moment she dreaded. Her heart pounded in her chest, heavy with the knowledge that she had become a weight Daniel did not ask for. The town had made its judgment plain, and though he had stood in her defense more than once, she could feel the strain of it pressing between them. She told herself leaving was kindness, that it would free him from whispers and Lily from shame, yet each fold of cloth felt like tearing a piece of herself away. Lily stirred beneath the quilt, rubbing her eyes with small fists. She sat up when she saw Evelyn's bag, confusion flashing into panic. "Where are you going?" she asked, her voice sharp with fear. Evelyn tried to smile, but it trembled. "Just a little way, sweetheart. I don't belong here." Lily scrambled from the bed and threw her arms around Evelyn's waist, her small body shaking. "Don't go," she pleaded, pressing her cheek against Evelyn's side. "You promised you'd stay." Evelyn's throat closed, tears stinging her eyes. "I never wanted to leave you," she whispered, stroking the girl's golden hair. "But sometimes wanting isn't enough." The door creaked, and Daniel stepped inside, snow melting on his boots, the cold air following him. He stopped when he saw the bag, his face tightening, though he said nothing. Evelyn met his eyes for only a moment before looking away. "I can't keep bringing trouble to your door," she said softly. "You've given me shelter, more than I deserve, but I won't make you carry the rest of it." Daniel's hands clenched at his sides. His silence filled the room, heavy as stone. Lily turned on him with tears running down her cheeks. "Tell her she can't go, Papa. Tell her." Daniel's jaw worked, but no words came. His eyes burned with something fierce and pained. Yet still he stood mute, as if bound by fear of what admitting the truth might mean. Evelyn rose, prying Lily's arms gently from her waist, her own tears falling fast now. "Sweetheart, you'll be all right. You have your father, and he will never leave you." Lily shook her head violently, clinging tighter, her cries breaking the still air. Daniel took one step forward, then stopped, his breath ragged. Evelyn waited, hoping, praying for something, a word, a plea, but none came. The silence was worse than anger, worse than scorn, for it told her nothing but that he would not choose. She lifted the bag, her hand trembling, and kissed Lily's damp cheek. "I love you," she whispered, though she had never dared say it before. Then she turned toward the door, the bitter cold waiting beyond, leaving behind the warmth she had almost begun to believe was hers. The sky was pale, with the first light of dawn, a gray wash over the snowy hills that made every shadow sharp. Evelyn's boots crunched on the frozen ground as she walked the narrow road away from the cabin, her carpetbag clutched tight in her hand. The cold cut through her shawl, but she hardly felt it. Each step was heavy with sorrow, each breath sharp with the pain of leaving behind what had almost felt like home. She did not look back, afraid that if she saw the smoke rising from the chimney or the shape of Lily's small figure at the window, her resolve would crumble. Her breath came fast, the road stretching before her like an endless trial. The silence pressed close until she heard another sound, boots on snow, steady and certain. Her steps faltered, and she turned. Daniel was there, his broad shoulders bent against the wind, his face drawn tight, his eyes fixed on her as though he had been running from something far heavier than the cold. He stopped a few feet away, his chest rising hard, his breath clouding in the air. "You were just going to go," he said, his voice rough, low with something more than anger. Evelyn gripped her bag tighter. "I had to. The town won't stop, and I can't bear to be the cause of your burden." Daniel shook his head, his hands clenching at his sides. "Don't you see, it isn't you that weighs on me, it's me. His eyes flicked to the ground, then back to hers, raw and unguarded. I lost my wife in the winter years ago. I told myself I would never love again, that caring for anyone only left me open to pain. So I built walls, and I stayed behind them, even with my own daughter. Evelyn's lips parted, the air cold on her tongue, but she could not speak. Daniel took a step closer, his voice breaking. Then you came, and I tried to keep you at a distance. But you read to Lily. You laughed with her. You saved her when I thought I'd lose her too. He swallowed hard, his eyes shining though no tears fell. I cannot let you walk away, not because of gossip, not because of fear, because I want you here, Evelyn. With her, with me. Her heart pounded so loudly, she thought the snow itself must hear it. She trembled, clutching the bag to her chest, torn between the voice of reason that told her she had no place, and the voice of hope that whispered she had already found one. Slowly, she lowered the bag to the snow, her hands shaking as she let it fall. She looked at him, her breath catching. I don't want to be a guest or a burden, she said, her voice soft but sure. I want to belong. I want a life with you, if you'll have me. Daniel closed the distance, his hand lifting to brush the tears from her cheek, his touch gentle against the raw cold. Then stay, he whispered, his voice ragged but steady. Stay, and we'll build it together. Evelyn leaned into his touch, her trembling stilled, and for the first time in years, she let herself believe. The snow melted slow that year, dripping from the eaves and soaking into the dark earth until the first shoots of green pushed through. By spring, the meadow behind the cabin was alive again, dotted with wildflowers and the soft hum of bees. The sycamore tree at the edge of the field spread its branches wide, tender leaves whispering in the breeze. Evelyn stood beneath it with Lily's hand in hers, her heart full to breaking. Daniel was beside them, straight-backed in his best shirt, though his hands fidgeted as if he had never worn clothes meant for more than work. There was no preacher, no choir, only the sound of birds and the murmur of a few neighbors who had come despite all the talk. Some still looked uncertain, but others carried baskets of bread and jars of honey, small offerings that spoke louder than words. The vows were plain. Daniel's voice was rough as he spoke them, his eyes fixed on Evelyn as though he feared she might vanish if he blinked. She answered steady, her voice soft yet clear, and when he slid a simple band of silver onto her finger, her hand trembled with the weight of the moment. Lily clapped and cheered, running in circles with her flower crown slipping down her brow. Evelyn laughed, tears sliding down her cheeks, and Daniel reached for her hand, steadying her, grounding her in the new life they had just chosen together. The cabin soon changed with that choice. Laughter threaded through its walls where silence had once lived. Evelyn planted herbs in neat rows, jars of dried leaves filling the shelves, and women from town began to visit quietly, asking for remedies for fever or teas for sleepless nights. Children came too, curious to hear her read from books, and even the hardest men nodded when they saw Daniel repairing their tools or lending his strong back without asking coin. The whispers faded, not all at once but slowly, worn down by kindness that could not be denied. At night, Evelyn would sit by the fire, with Lily pressed against her side and Daniel's arm across the back of her chair. The three of them would talk in low voices, of chores and seasons, and sometimes nothing at all. And in those quiet moments she felt more at home than she ever had. Beneath her hand a new secret stirred, the small swell of her belly a promise of what was to come. She often caught Daniel glancing at it, his face softening, his eyes shining with a hope he had long thought gone. One evening, as the sycamore branches rustled in the breeze and Lily chased fireflies in the yard, Evelyn leaned against Daniel's shoulder, breathing in the scent of spring grass and wood smoke. The ranch no longer felt haunted by loss. It hummed with life, with belonging, with the sound of a family remade. She had once been a woman cast aside, unwanted and forgotten. But now she was chosen every day, and that was all the future she needed. If this story touched your heart, if you believe in love found where no one expects it, then don't forget to subscribe to Western Love Legends, like this tale, and leave a comment to share your thoughts. And who knows, maybe even Daniel himself will read them. Though, between you and me, he still hasn't figured out how to smile proper in front of a crowd.